let's get started this morning on a Tuesday with this wonderful topic, building inclusive teams. Really excited to moderate this talk and just learn more from Josie on this critical topic, actually. So, we'll start with introductions. Josie, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself to the group.
Awesome. Thank you, Anand. It's great to be here this morning. So, everybody, I'm Josie. I'm the VP of Software Engineering as well as Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Tile. I've been in the tech industry for over 20 years, working in the last 10 years as an engineering leader on large scale consumer technologies at places like Apple and American Express and and I'm super happy to be here today and talking about building inclusive teams.
Perfect. Thanks, Josie. I first love that there's a formal title or just a role around DEI at Tile, and that you are leading the efforts. That's great to know. Just a quick kind of introduction about myself. I'm Anand Safi. I'm an engineering manager at Mark 43. I lead the mobile team here, and then I have probably half the experience of Josie, so close to a decade. But just really kind of love the conversations and just any I would say programs around DEI efforts. A topic that I closely follow, and I love to get involved in my roles or just in the community. So excited to learn from Josie on this as well. So without taking any more time, we'll just get started. I think the first thing that I was curious to know actually, when we talk about DEI, there are like three pieces to that, and people just kind of start with diversity or just like an umbrella bucket. So I would love to kind of hear from you in terms of why is inclusion specifically important and not just diversity actually when we talk about these things.
Yes, and so I think this is something that's so crucial, but it's something that we've failed to really think about in the tech industry so far. So many companies are focused on the diversity piece. So diversity is really about the numbers, right? Racial diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, right? And so it's about recognizing the differences. But inclusion is crucial because inclusion is about how each of those different people can thrive when working together. And so, if you don't have the inclusion piece, you pretty much have the revolving door we have in the tech industry today. 56% of women leave tech after 10 to 20 years. And the reason for that isn't because they want to go start a family. The number one reason is because of bias. It's the microaggressions that people face. It's the little things. I call it death by a thousand paper cuts, right? It's not one thing. I mean, sometimes it can be, but a lot of times it's the little things that happen on the daily basis that just get you down. And so, inclusion in some ways is more important to focus on first before you try to tackle diversity. Because if you don't create a truly inclusive environment where everyone feels that they can thrive, you're not going to be able to keep any of your potential diverse hires that you get in the company. And especially now, this is super crucial with what's going on with COVID today.
Yeah, I think you exactly. I think just I was going to talk about something in terms of how this relates to the company operational strategy success or just commercial success or profits. Before I kind of just go into that, I did want to remind the audience, like I have a few prepared questions, but definitely feel free to get your Q&As in. You should see a Q&A tab, and we'll definitely get to questions in time as well. So yeah, Josie, I think you touched in terms of this is more important than ever, and everybody realizes that. But how do we kind of tie that to the commercial success of a company or say increasing top line revenue or profits overall, just in addition to the culture and just the kind of activities surrounding culture?
Yeah, and one of the things I do have to say in the last year, I think companies have started to realize just how important this is to focus on, but I still don't see the actions being taken as much as is needed, right? But if you do truly take the actions, you will see the benefits from it. Deloitte did some research. Diverse companies enjoy 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. A Gartner study found that inclusive teams improve team performance by up to 30% when you have a highly diverse environment. And then another study showed that companies with diverse management teams had a 19% increase in revenue compared to their less diverse counterparts. And so it's diversity is going to increase your bottom line. However, here's the one that's really interesting is every company I know is saying, "Hey, we're focusing on this," right? However, only 40% of employees actually agree that their managers are fostering an inclusive environment. And so I think that is really where we need to dig into. And this is one of the areas I talk about a lot that we don't tend to think about. So, in my mind, DE&I, to be fully successful, you need to implement three different pillars. The first one is having comprehensive DEI practices. Things like, how do you reduce bias in hiring? Maybe blind resume reviews, impact job descriptions, those sorts of things. The second one is really creating that inclusive culture. Like, can every single person in your team really feel that they can thrive? Do you have employee resource groups where people can, be themselves and get support? Do you have, sponsoring programs where, underrepresented minorities are really able to, get the exposure that they need to upper management, right? But then the third pillar, which is the one people don't usually think falls under D&I, is effective and fair management practices and principles. And this is the one that I think is so key and crucial, and the one that we sometimes forget, because at the end of the day, it is your managers that are creating the inclusive environments or non inclusive environments on their teams. They're the ones in those daily meetings, they're the ones actually hiring, right? And so if we don't get managers trained on how to have effective and fair management practices and principles, then it will never really create these inclusive cultures we truly need.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely. I love how you broke down into the three pillars, and probably your call to action in terms of frontline management or people who are kind of just involved with the teams day to day. They need to be kind of on the forefront of championing these initiatives or just leading by example with the right training and support. So actually,
Mhm.
I had one question that just ties beautifully into like everything sounds kind of really fundamental or just kind of foundational actually for any company, but at what stage should a company focus on DEI? Say, like the smaller companies might not have the luxury in terms of trying to dedicate time and effort for every single thing. But what are some kind of steps that you can start, say, for any level, or when should you formalize a DEI strategy for your company?
Yeah. And so, honestly, in my mind, you want to start thinking about inclusion specifically as early as possible, right? Like, it should be part of that culture you're defining, those core values. It is much easier to start with an inclusive culture and focus then on, hey, how do we get more diversity in, than in, let's say you've got hired 40 people and then you try to bring the inclusion piece in, right? Like, it
Yeah.
is much harder once you've started defining the culture and hiring people. So I think the biggest thing is from day one, starting with the fact that, hey, inclusion is important here. Like, it is one of our core values. Like, and this is something we care about from, our managers as well. And it's something that, the company is thinking about when hiring. And, obviously, doing things like going to conferences and
Mhm.
partnering with, diverse partners can sometimes obviously cost money and be expensive. But, one of the things I tell people is there's a lot that you can do if you're just willing to put a little bit of time into it, right? Like coming up with a policy for making sure your job descriptions are inclusive and don't have bias, like that's not that hard. You can have you can do an internal review if you need to with that.
Yeah.
One of the things is you can a lot of times, if you want to partner with a diverse community, you can offer, hey, some of our engineers or some of our managers could mentor some of the individuals and have it be a partnership, right? Find local organizations that are, trying to get people into the tech industry and see how you can partner with them, right? So it is harder without a
Yeah.
budget, but it is still possible. Like
True.
is what I also want to tell people. So
Yeah, and I think your first kind of just high level point, it brings a lot of clarity that do not think as an umbrella bucket that is just too kind of high level or unapproachable. Just kind of break it down into inclusion, just a core fabric in our DNA of values actually, and then once you have that going, naturally diversity or just diverse hiring or just kind of the recognizing bias or just blind review of resumes, all of that will follow into just kind of how we roll mindset actually. So really love that. I think I would just definitely love to switch at this point to the Q&A in terms of, because there's so many great questions coming in, and I think there is some really great ones. I'll probably start with the first one from Dan, which is the most upvoted one, and I personally would love to know this as well in terms of. Can you give examples of microaggressions and how to spot? I think there's a lot of training on how to deal, but I think even taking a step back on how do we realize that, or what is that aha moment in that sense actually that you have come to know actually?
yeah, and so I think this is a really fascinating one to be discussing in the workplace because, like I said, it's the little things. It's having your ideas appropriated when you're a woman and somebody else repeats it 5 minutes later, and all of a sudden it's a great idea, but when you said it, it fell flat, right? It's I've been called feisty in a meeting before for standing up for my team and, arguing and defending them. I'm literally just giving you examples of things that have happened to me. I was in a
Mhm.
partner meeting and I was the only woman in the room and I got asked to go grab lunch outside. It's like I said, it's the little things. It's your coworkers all going out for drinks over the weekend, but since you're a woman and they're all men, they don't feel comfortable inviting you, so you never get to go out with the rest of the team, right? And so it really is. It's the little things that happen on a daily basis, and the first thing is just being aware that these things happen to both women and underrepresented minorities, right? Understanding that, like, hey, to get true equity, like, they're already struggling more. And that's something we really need to understand in tech. And then, Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor, recently released a book called Just Work. And it really talks about how to deal with these sorts of microaggressions in the workplace, which I thought was really enlightening in a way that I hadn't seen any other book describe before. And she really talks about normalizing being able to talk about this in your workplace. She really believes, in a normal meeting in any workplace, right? You might have 1 to 2 of these microaggressions happen during any like 1 hour meeting, right? And it's not because people are bad, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, calling somebody out for saying something means you're calling them out as bad. And that's the thing, like we all have bias. Even though I've been doing this for years, like I still have biases, right? And so, but it's being able to slow down and recognize, hey, I have these. How can we recognize them and be more aware? So, in her book Just Work, she really talks about being able to build a culture where you can call it out and say, like, oh, hey, I think that thing somebody just said was kind of biased. And it doesn't turn into a huge discussion or anything. It just like somebody makes that comment and the other person acknowledges, oh, hey, yeah, I think you're right. Or maybe it leads into a small discussion, but it's something that they've normalized that, hey, it's okay to bring up if you see something like this happen. And I don't see a lot of companies doing that. And obviously,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of, psychological safety to create a space where that is possible. But honestly, I read that and I was like, wow, this is amazing. If you can really create a space where people can call this out, this is how we truly create inclusion in the future.
I agree 100%. The whole notion of safe space, brave space, however we put it, is around this thing. It's not only self-realization when you come across something directly or indirectly and just kind of feeling sad, embarrassed, or just kind of shocked in terms of the culture, or just not, even if this is not a part of culture, it can naturally happen to anyone actually. So just trying to a little bit be more vocal about that, or just kind of talking with folks internally, can also be a huge first step actually in that realization for a company actually, so, or a team. So yeah, definitely a great point there. The next question is from Albert, which is, how can we as leaders improve our ability to self identify our own actions that come across as microaggressions? So I think this is a natural extension. Like somebody might point it out, but how can we be self conscious or just self realize these things if we were to kind of be in the middle of such a situation?
Yeah, and so first I think it's taking the time to learn about these things, right? Taking the time to learn about the experiences, women in tech face, blacks in tech face, underrepresented minorities. Like, what are the challenges? Like, what are the struggles? Listen to some of these stories to understand, like, what are the microaggressions? Take the time to learn, and then spend some time reflecting. I say, one of the big things I talk about is, inclusion and all of these things aren't going to change without managers truly taking action. And one of the actions anybody can take is, at the end of your workday, reflect on your meetings, right? Spend 5 minutes reflecting on, hey, was there something biased said during a meeting? Even better if you can do it right after your meetings. I have back to back meetings all day, so usually
Right.
my reflections happen at the end of the day. But yeah, can you spend some time thinking about, what could have been gone differently? Was there anybody in my team? And one of the things I say companies that are trying to build inclusive cultures that is crucial is measuring this, right? So do engagement surveys with your employees and ask inclusion questions. Ask people, do they feel they can speak up, right? Do they feel that they can have a different point of view and still share it, right? It's enlightening to see what people respond to if you just ask them. And sometimes we're afraid to ask because, again, it falls back to feeling bad that if we had a microaggression. And so part of it is also getting out of that mindset of feeling bad and really getting more into a mindset of being curious about, hey,
Yeah.
when is this potentially happening? What can I learn from it? And how can I prevent this from happening again in the future? Or as a leader, here's the even bigger one. How can I apologize and then make it so that my employees learn, like, hey, this is a culture we're trying to create, right? And I think the vulnerability piece is so crucial because we're all going to mess up at some point, like, even
Right.
if you're being super conscious about it. And so the big thing is being willing to say, oh, hey, I'm sorry I messed up. I'll make sure to, think, change this in the future.
Yeah, I think I love the pieces you said there in terms of first reflection, just beyond what was discussed in the meeting, in terms of how it was discussed or how the collaboration went, the communication style, like just in terms of your own self, the tone of the meeting, just everything in terms of reflection beyond the actual content of the meeting. And then I love your point around taking it one step further, like after realization, there should be a big piece of accountability actually, and then vulnerability actually. So if you do come to realize, or if you come across like something like of such magnitude might have happened, then just taking the steps in terms of how you set, just kind of leading by example or just a practice for yourself, for your team, is really critical. So yeah, and I think I also wanted to just go back and say, like, I think your recommendation for the book for Kim Scott will go a long way. So thank you for that. I think a lot of that is just kind of self training, self awareness, along with just kind of industry training actually. One thing that you said at the end was around measuring kind of through surveys or just getting employee polls, and that just ties directly into next question from Shani. I hope I'm saying the name right.
Mhm.
Sorry if I'm not. But yeah, how do you measure how well you're doing on building inclusive teams or inclusive environment, or what do you shoot for as good? So there are ways to measure, but what is that baseline? Is there an industry baseline? Do you come up with your own as a company through iterations? Like, what have you had success in terms of calling this is good or this is making progress in terms of our efforts for an inclusive environment?
Yeah. So again, I think with inclusion, thinking about how to measure that inclusion, especially if you're doing engagement surveys, is crucial, right? So actually, I think 4 engagement surveys ago, because we do them twice a year, I actually went and added in a whole inclusion section to our Culture AMP surveys that we send out. And so now we're able to track it every 6 months and really see, like, hey, what's getting better, what are areas that we can improve on. And one of the ones that has really come up recently with everything going on in today, which has actually been something that's actually been really good, is we actually set up an engagement survey for people who had just joined in the last 90 days. Because, so right now we're going through a big hiring spurt. I became VP of software in March and I had 29 reports. And as of like a few weeks ago, I had 52. So we did a lot of hiring in the last many months. And so part of the struggle is obviously if you're doing a lot of hiring is thinking about that inclusion piece, making sure that people are feeling included. And so I think especially with, everybody being onboarded remotely right now with COVID going on and everything else, like getting that retention piece with your new hires is so crucial right now. So that was the other one I was going to add on, especially right now, is don't just do your entire employee base, but I mean do that too, but also try to do one for your new hires because it's very interesting because they don't have all of the existing like bonds from like when people were working together in the office. It's very interesting seeing what's kind of coming up. And so yeah, that's a new trick that I learned. So.
Yeah, I think that's great to know, and I think yeah, a lot of the companies are in this hiring growth phase. Same for us in terms of our headcount that was in the first 8 years has probably doubled in 8 months actually. So we are definitely continuing to grow in like that sense, and I think a lot of your learning set that you have will go a long way for myself as well and many other teams or leaders out there. The next question was from Marwan, which is pretty yeah pretty solid in terms of how do you make sure DEI, like because we group this together, is just not diversity greenwashing. Like, how do you truly differentiate or just not create a false impression of any kind in that sense?
Yes, and this is so important because guess what? Employees can sense bullshit. Like I'm gonna put it out there for companies. Like if you claim just putting up a black square for Black Lives Matter and then not doing anything else is how you're gonna get employees to walk out the door. And so, I think now more than ever, it's so important that you're not just doing diversity greenwashing because your employees are going to notice and they're going to start leaving. So first of all, there's that. And I think the second one is, this is why in my mind, and this is actually why I'm head of DEI at Tile, is DEI shouldn't just fall under HR, right? Because it's not just an HR thing. You actually want to be thinking about this across every single aspect of your company. Are you thinking about diversity when you're thinking about your customers, right? Are you actually accounting for important features that you should be thinking about, right? It's when you're working with your vendors, are you thinking about diversity in your vendor selection? And so this is where I think having people who are willing to call it out and say, like, hey, no, this is important. Like, we can't just, just put this under the rug. Like, we have to focus on this. And you can use the numbers, right? Those are there to help and say, like, hey, why is this important? But at the end of the day, the people who are just getting into the workforce now, like, they care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think we're also going to be seeing, as the new workforce is going in, they're going to be choosing based on companies that care about these things, right? But it is a hard needle to move. Like, I'll be the first one to admit, this is a hard needle to move, right? Like, really, really big companies say they care about this stuff, but there's a lot of things that still go on behind the scenes where it isn't being inclusive, right? And so, again, it's each and every one of us has the ability to speak up when you see something happening. And that's especially when you're a manager or a leader, like, you have a position of privilege that the person who is being biased might not. And so it's so crucial to really take that stand as leaders in this space.
Got it. No, I think that that is great. We'll take one more question, and I think this is kind of related to there are two questions of similar sort. But the question from Arpita is, how do you ensure middle level management follows through the leadership plans for DEI actually? So, and there's a similar question like, how do we promote and maintain an inclusive culture for kind of frontline managers or middle managers? So, what is that practical kind of thing that middle management or frontline managers can do to make sure these plans are kind of executed effectively?
Yeah. So, first on the company side, I think it's about training managers, right? I think, especially on the engineering side of things, so many of us, like, get promoted into leadership, but don't realize that that's a completely different skill set that we need to learn. And part of that is how to build inclusive teams. And so, first, I think companies are doing a huge disservice if they don't spend time when they promote somebody to train them. But then the other one is really holding them accountable for these things, right? Like, how can how do you set goals around creating inclusive teams for your engineering managers, and not just your engineering managers, all of your managers, ensuring, like, hey, this is something we advocate for, this is something we care about, this is something we want you to be spending your time on. And I think it's really about, you know people have so many things that they can be spending their time doing. They're going to be focused on those that are being called out, or they're being encouraged, that there's goals around, right? And so, if you really truly want your middle level managers to follow these plans, like, set their goals around that.
Got it. Perfect. No, that's great. So yeah, I know we're at time, but we could definitely talk a lot more on this. There's also a comment in terms of there's another whole pillar that companies are considering along belonging. But what
Mhm.
I'll say is me and Josie will be in the lounge, so definitely just be around for 10 more minutes, and we can carry over the conversation there actually. So thank you everyone for being present, for such wonderful questions, and thank you Josie for just leading such a stimulating discussion with packed with action items and insights for us and to take back to our teams and companies. Thank you so much.